In this video, I'm going to show you how to do the basic oil change on a Fox step cast fork. Now with the newer Fox forks, like the step cast, Fox recommends sending your fork in every 125 hours of riding or annually, whichever comes first. Now personally, I don't like going more than 60 hours of riding without changing the oil. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do here. Now this procedure is really not that difficult. All we're going to do is we're going to drop the lowers off the fork, clean everything off, put them back on, fill them up with oil, and tighten everything back up. There is an optional step that I'll show in this video, and that's removing the top cap and checking the oil on the air spring side. Now on the air spring side, the oil really doesn't dissipate that much, so you're probably good, but it's not a bad idea to check it anyway. And again, it's optional, so if you want to really simplify this process, you can skip that step, but I'll show you how to do it. Here's what you're going to need to tackle this job. You'll need the 20 weight Fox Gold oil. You'll need some rubbing alcohol or parts cleaner. Rubbing alcohol works great. You can find it at a drugstore. You will need a 10mm socket wrench on an extension, at least a 3-inch extension, if not 4 or 5. This is a 3-inch and it's just barely long enough to do this job. So if you can get a longer one, that's even better. So this is needed on the step cast. You don't need the extension, by the way, on the regular float forks. If you're doing the optional top cap assembly removal, you will need a 26mm socket wrench. And this is one that I got directly from Fox, and it is ground down on the end so that it's very flat. The regular socket wrenches can come off the top cap easy and strip it a little bit. So if you're ordering parts from Fox, I recommend getting this 26 from them. Also, if you are removing the top cap, you'll need a shock pump. You don't need this if you're not removing the top cap. You will need this lower leg assembly removal tool. Specifically, it's part number 398000681A. Again, unlike a regular float fork that you can kind of get away with not having this, you have to have this on the step cast. You'll need various size metric Allen wrenches. You'll probably need a 4 or a 5 to remove your stem to get the fork off the bike. You'll need a 2.5 to get the hose retaining clip off, and you'll need a long 2mm Allen wrench. It's got to be at least about 3 or 4 inches long, and that's to remove the rebound knob. You'll probably need at least one pick, and that is to help work the crush washer back on for reassembly, because again, you're having to reach up inside the fork legs to get the crush washer back on. You'll need one of these cheap little syringes that you can get at the drugstore. Try to get one that's measured in milliliters or cc's, and get one that's 10 milliliters. And you'll need a torque wrench like this Park TW5. Having a work stand makes this job a lot easier. Finally, you'll need something to catch the oil, like this oil drain pan. The first thing that we're going to do is remove the fork from the bicycle. Now this is actually an optional step as well. It is simpler to do this, but you could in theory do this oil change by leaving the fork on the bike, just removing the front wheel and then elevating the bike, such as in a work stand. If you do want to do the optional step that I mentioned and check the oil in the top cap, then unthread the cover on the left side. This is the air spring side. When I say left, I mean if you're standing behind the bike. And then take your 26mm socket wrench. And I recommend just loosening this before you remove the fork from the bike, or before you start this procedure, while the bike is on the ground. That way you can put some weight on this and keep from stripping the top cap. So we're just going to loosen it just when it starts to move. Okay, it just moved a little bit, and now it's time to proceed with removing the fork from the bike. So I'm going to go through these steps of removing the fork pretty quickly, because as a bike mechanic who is changing the oil in the fork, I'm going to assume you already know how to do this, but I'll just show the steps real quickly. So we'll take the front wheel off, and whether you're doing this with the fork on the bike or off, you do have to remove the front wheel, of course. The first thing we want to do, whether you're leaving the fork on the bike or taking it off, is you do have to remove the hose from the fastener here. Next, we'll remove the front brake caliper. This is typically 5mm Allen bolts. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a rubber band handy because we're going to put that on the bolts so that they will stay on the caliper while we do this. And there we go, we've just secured those bolts so that they don't fall off while you're doing the procedure. And we're going to remove the stem by loosening the pinch bolts with either a 4 or 5 millimeter Allen wrench, depending on your bike. And I don't mind dropping the fork out because it's not a bad idea every 6 months or so to take your fork off and clean out your headset. Now we will remove the top cap so we can drop the fork out. And whether you remove the top cap first and then do the pinch bolts, or do the pinch bolts first with the top cap, it really doesn't matter. It's just a matter of preference. And by the way, just a little tip, if you want to take your phone out and take a picture of your current configuration, so I've got 1 spacer on the bottom, 2 on the top, it's always a good idea to take pictures of things as you do a service if it's the first time. That way you remember the way things were. Before I start the procedure, I'm just going to wipe off the crown race, and I've got a paper towel with some rubbing alcohol. Just clean that off real good and wipe down the steer tube. Before I continue, since I've got the bearings out, I'm going to go ahead and just wipe out the head tube. So I've just taken my bicycle out of the work stand and I'm going to put the fork in it, and it makes this job a lot easier. So we're looking up inside the right fork leg. And so the first thing that you'll need to do is take your 2 millimeter Allen wrench. That again has to be pretty long, and there's a little bolt way up inside there, and you just got to loosen that to remove this rebound knob. So I've got it in there. I'm just going to turn it. Hold the rebound knob as you do this. Okay, and there's your rebound adjustment knob, and of course you've got the little screws. So make sure you don't drop that when it comes out. So probably want to hold your hand underneath as you remove that. Now it's time to loosen the nuts up inside the fork legs, but before you do that, make sure you put a drain pan underneath. Okay, so I'm going to take my long 10 millimeter socket. I'm going to work it on there with my fingers first, just so I can make sure it's on the nut, and then I'll attach my ratchet on there. So just loosen those nuts, and you know, they'll probably, you'll feel the tension come off, and then you'll just want to pull it out, and keep your hand underneath just in case. So there's the nut from the left fork leg, and the crush washer did not come off with this one, but it will come off when we remove the lowers. Now we'll get the nut off the right fork leg in the exact same way. We'll remove the nut from the right fork leg, which is the damper side, and this one actually is a little bit lower, so it's a little bit easier to get to. And there it is. Crush washer stayed on that one too. So I'm shining a flashlight up inside just so you can see what it looks like. So you see the damper and spring assembly sticking out, and you should see the crush washer just hanging on there. But like I said, that'll come off when we remove the lowers now. Now we're going to take our lower leg removal tool and thread it on. And I'm starting with the spring side, but it doesn't matter if you do the spring side or damper side first. Just find those threads. And what you're going to do is just put it all the way on there and then back it off a turn, because you're going to need a little gap in there to loosen it. So I'm going to back it off a turn and a half or so. And then take your hammer, and we're just going to tap it, and you'll see the oil start to come out typically when you do this. And then I'm going to thread it on a little bit more and then back it off again, just so I can have a gap. Same thing, thread it on, back it off half a turn or turn. And now I'm going to go over to the other side and do that side. No oil coming out yet. Sometimes you'll get it, sometimes you won't. I'll repeat the process on the other side. So now I'm on the damper side. Actually, no oil yet, but I'm going to take this off and just try to drop the lowers down, because I know those are loosened up. See if we can get them off. There we go. We got some oil coming out. Okay, what's happening is those crush washers, since they're still on the threads, are keeping the lowers on. So we've got oil dripping out, and there's the rest of it. And to me, that oil looked a little cloudy, so I'm glad I'm doing this after about 6 months of riding. What's most likely going to happen when you drop those lowers off like we just did is you'll see your crush washers fall out. This is why you want to replace your crush washers. This one you can see the nylon coming off, and these really should be replaced every time you do a procedure like this. So now with the lowers off, just take a paper towel with some rubbing alcohol and wipe everything down really good. I clean the inside and the outside, and it's just a good opportunity to really clean your fork. Make sure you don't have any damage to your seals. If you see any tear in any part of the rubber of this seal, then you'll want to replace this seal. Also, using a rag or paper towel with rubbing alcohol or parts cleaner, wipe down your stanchion tubes really good. And just as a tip, it's a good idea to wipe your stanchion tubes down before every ride or immediately after a ride. That will really keep dirt out of your seals. Make sure you don't knock your travel adjust O-ring off when you do this. You'll also want to make sure you clean the threads of the damper assembly and the air spring assembly, because as you remove those lowers and knock them off, you'll probably have some nylon from the crush washer on those threads. So you just wipe those off really well. If you're choosing to not remove the top cap, you're done with the cleaning and it's time to reinstall and put the oil in. But I'm going to remove the top cap to show you how to do this. Before we remove the top cap, we need to let the air pressure out, and before we do that, I'm going to hook up a shock pump so I can know my pressures. If you don't write down your air pressure settings for your suspension, it's probably a good idea to do that. So I'm going to hook this up and see what my air pressure is. So my gauge reads just over 50. Realize that when you hook up a shock pump, you'll get about 3 to 5 psi lost in the hose. So my suspension pressure is around 55. Take something like a small Allen wrench and just press on this valve here and relieve the air pressure. Now we'll just use our 26mm socket wrench and remove the top cap. Now remember, we did loosen this just a little bit, so this shouldn't be too hard to turn. And there's our top cap assembly. And these are the volume spacers, by the way. If you wanted to add or remove volume spacers, this is how you would do it. I won't really talk about that in this video, but if you want to learn more about setting up your suspension, check out my video on the complete guide to mountain bike suspension setup, and I talk about these volume spacers. The only thing we're going to do at this point is just hold this upside down and see if any oil comes out. You may get some, you may not get any. And now we're ready to put everything back together. Now it's time to put the oil back in our fork, and if you remove the top cap, that's what we want to start with first. So I'm going to get about between 2 and 3 cc's, or between 2 and 3 milliliters of the Fox Gold oil. And I'm just putting those 2 to 3 cc's of the oil on top of the air spring. And of course, if you didn't remove the top cap, you're not doing this step. We'll put the top cap back on the bike. Turn it as much as you can with your fingers, and I always recommend starting something with your fingers just so you know you're not cross-threading it. It should turn several turns before you have to use your 26mm socket wrench. And finish tightening the top cap with your socket wrench and get it pretty snug, but you don't have to get it completely tight yet, because we'll do it back on the bike for the same reason that we loosened it before we took it off, and that's so that you don't strip that top cap. So again, just put a little weight on, just snug it up pretty good. Hook up your shock pump and add the pressure that you typically run. Now it's time to put the lowers back on, and obviously you want to make sure you do this in the right direction. So on the right side is your damper side where your lockout lever is. Left side is the spring side. And on the lowers, the left side has your brake bosses. So where the brake caliper goes. So that's one way you can remember it. So that's the same side as the spring side. So you're just going to very carefully just work these back in. So just slide the stanchion tubes a couple inches down inside the lowers. You don't want to put them on all the way because we got to add our oil now. I have the fork upside down on the ground to add the oil, and you'll need to go on Fox's website and check their oil volume chart to see how much oil your fork requires. This is a fit for damper, so this one requires 25 cc's on the spring side and 15 cc's on the damper side. So using my syringe, I'm going to start with the spring side, and that's the side with the top cap that you took off and the one that you add your air pressure. So this is a 10 cc syringe. So just look down in there, put the nozzle down into the hole. You should not see the spring or damper thread sticking out. You should have the lowers backed off enough so that those aren't sticking out so that you can add your oil. So I'll just do this and get 25 cc's down in there. And likewise, because this is a fit for damper, I'll put 15 cc's on the damper side. Now it's time to slide the lowers all the way on so that you will see down inside there the threads come out for the spring and damper assemblies. And it's kind of hard to see in the video because they're so far down in there, but just kind of look down and watch them. You should see them come up. You may have to take your finger or a pick and guide the damper side, so sometimes it'll catch and not go right in the middle, and so sometimes you will have to guide that in, but you should be able to push them down all the way, and you should see both of those threads coming out when you look down inside. With the threads sticking out the bottom, now it's time to put our crush washer on, and this is a little tricky. What I did was I dropped it down in there, and then I just used my pick to kind of place it right on the threads. I had to pick it up from the side and just kind of work it onto those threads and push it down. It just took about 15 seconds. So I've got the crush washers on, now I'll put the nuts on, and you might be able to have it stay in the socket. You've got to keep the fork predominantly upside down while you do this so the oil doesn't leak out. So you can kind of maybe drop it down in there and work it on with a pick, or leave it on the socket. So I can kind of hold it sideways and keep it on there, and it'll just try to work it on. So I've got the crush washers and nuts on both sides. I've snugged them up a little bit with the socket wrench. Now I'm going to use my torque wrench and go 5.7 Newton meters. Now it's time to put the rebound knob back on, and what I like to do is put the screw onto the tip of the Allen wrench and then put it back up into the rebound knob, and then keep your pressure on there while you put it back on. And it just takes a little patience. Again, this is where the step cast is not as easy to work on as your standard float fork, but just use a little patience, get it on there, make sure the rebound knob is on there good so you can feel it's on the actual assembly, so it doesn't really turn easily. And then you should be able to just turn that little screw and thread it back on. And then what I like to do to make sure the screw is snug is keep your 2mm Allen wrench in the screw, and then put something in the slot like this just to hold that rebound knob secure, because it's kind of hard to do with your fingers. And then just make sure that screw is nice and snug, and then test your rebound knob. Make sure it turns with the appropriate clicks. Now it's time to put the fork back on the bike if you removed it, and if you did remove it, don't forget to put just a really thin coating of grease on your headset bearings. when putting your brake caliper back on, don't tighten everything down all the way because you'll need to center your brakes after you put the front wheel on. Got the front wheel on, and in case you don't know this, to center brakes, usually you can hold the brake lever down with the bolts loose and then tighten your bolts to hold the caliper on, and that will typically center your brakes. If not, then you may have to resort to other methods that I have a video on. It's called How to Center Hydraulic Disc Brakes. So I've got the fork installed, bike back on the ground with the wheels on, of course, and I'm going to give my final snug to the top cap. So just again, push down with your hand, and probably want to hold the wheel with your leg, and go to 25 Newton meters on the top cap assembly. Then I'll just thread my cover back on. And then I'll line up my stem, tighten up the headset, and I'm done.